employee of the railroad. I think we're on a frozen train. We are, he said, and followed her with prompt, disciplined obedience. No explanations were necessary. It was as if in unspoken understanding they were answering a call to duty, and it seemed natural that of the hundreds aboard, it was the two of them who should be partners in danger. "Any idea how long we've been standing?" she asked, as they hurried on through the next car. "Nope," he said. "We were standing when I woke up." They went the length of the train, finding no porters, no waiters in the diner, no brakeman, no conductor. They glanced at each other once in a while, but kept silent. They knew the stories of abandoned trains, of the crews that vanished in sudden bursts of rebellion against serfdom. They got off at the end of the train, with no motion around them save the wind on their faces, and they climbed swiftly aboard the engine. The engine's headlight was on, stretching like an accusing arm into the void of the night. The engine's cab was empty. Her cry of desperate triumph broke out in answer to the shock of the sight. Good for them. They're human beings. She stopped, aghast, as at the cry of a stranger. She noticed that Kellogg stood watching her curiously, with the faint hint of a smile. It was an old steam engine, the best that the railroad had been able to provide for the Comet. The fire was banked in the grates, the steam gauge was low, and in the great windshield before them the headlight fell upon a band of ties that should have been running to meet them, but lay still instead, like a ladder's steps, counted, numbered, and ended. She reached for the log book and looked at the names of the train's last crew. The engineer had been Pat Logan. Her head dropped slowly, and she closed her eyes. She thought of the first run on a green-blue track that must have been in Pat Logan's mind, as it was now in hers, through the silent hours of his last run on any rail. "Miss Taggart?" said Owen Kellogg softly. She jerked her head up. "Yes," she said. "Yes. Well." Her voice had no color, except the metallic tinge of decision. "We'll have to get to a phone and call for another crew." She glanced at her watch. "At the rate we were running, I think we must be about 80 miles from the Oklahoma state line. I believe Bradshaw is this road's nearest division point to call. We're somewhere within 30 miles of it." "Are there any Taggart trains following us?" "The next one is number 253, the transcontinental freight. But it won't get here till about 7 a.m. if it's running on time, which I doubt." "Only one freight in 7 hours?" He said it involuntarily, with a note of outraged loyalty to the great railroad he had once been proud to serve. Her mouth moved in the brief snap of a smile. "Our transcontinental traffic is not what it was in your day." He nodded slowly. "I don't suppose there are any Kansas Western trains coming tonight either?" "I can't remember offhand, but I think not." He glanced at the poles by the side of the track. "I hope that the Kansas Western people have kept their phones in order." "You mean that the chances are they haven't, if we judge by the state of their track. But we'll have to try it." "Yes." She turned to go, but stopped. She knew it was useless to comment, but the words came out involuntarily. "You know," she said, "it's those lanterns our men put behind the train to protect us that's the hardest thing to take. They felt more concern for human lives than their country had shown for theirs." His swift glance at her was like a shot of deliberate emphasis. Then he answered gravely, "Yes, Miss Taggart." Climbing down the ladder on the side of the engine, they saw a cluster of passengers gathered by the track, and more figures emerging from the train to join them. By some special instinct of their own, the men who had sat waiting knew that someone had taken charge. Someone had assumed the responsibility, and it was now safe to show signs of life. They all looked at her with an air of inquiring expectation as she approached. The unnatural pallor of the moonlight seemed to dissolve the differences of their faces, and to stress the quality they all had in common. A look of cautious appraisal, part fear, part plea, part impertinence held in abeyance. "Is there anyone here who wishes to be spokesman for the passengers?" she asked. They looked at one another. There was no answer. "Very well," she said. You don't have to speak. I'm Dagny Taggart, the operating vice president of this railroad, and—" There was a rustle of response from the group, half movement, half whisper, resembling relief. "And I'll do the speaking. We are on a train that has been abandoned by its crew. There was no physical accident. The engine is intact, but there is no one to run it. This is what the newspapers call a frozen train. You all know what it means, and you know the reasons. Perhaps you knew the reasons long before they were discovered by the men who deserted you tonight. The law forbade them to desert, but this will not help you now." A woman shrieked suddenly with the demanding petulance of hysteria. "What are we going to do?" Dagny paused to look at her. The woman was pushing forward, to squeeze herself into the group, to place some human bodies between herself and the sight of the great vacuum, the plains stretching off and dissolving into moonlight, the dead phosphorescence of impotent borrowed energy. The woman had a coat thrown over a nightgown. The coat was slipping open, and her stomach protruded under the gown's thin cloth, with that loose obscenity of manner which assumes all human self-revelation to be ugliness and makes no effort to conceal it. For a moment, Dagny regretted the necessity to continue.